Hola, thrill seekers! All right, by special request, I asked yesterday if people wanted to hear one of the other lectures that Dogen gave on Rohatsu, which is Buddha's Enlightenment Day, which is celebrated on December 8th. And a lot of people said they did, so I'm going to read this one. This one's a bit longer than the one from yesterday, so I'm going to start off with it. But before I start with it, I should mention that I already covered another one of Dogen's Rohatsu speeches a couple of weeks ago. There was a video I put up called, I think, Zen Master Dogen's Turd Story. That lecture was another lecture delivered on Rohatsu, so if you go back and look at that Dogen's Turd Story. And just because I forgot to mention it yesterday, the one I read yesterday was number 136, Dharma Hall Discourse number 136. So I can't get this on the screen. Anyway, so if you got the book and you want to go look it up, it's number 136. And today's is number 360, Dharma Hall Discourse number 360, and the translators have titled it The Wondrous Fragrance of Wisdom and Virtue Amid Snow. And as I always say, these are added by the translators. Dogen did not give titles to these discourses. And this one actually has a date on it, so it's his Enlightenment Day Dharma Hall Discourse in the year 1249, which would have been, you can always figure out how old Dogen is pretty easily because he was born in 1200, so he was 49 years old. He would only live to be 53 years old, but he probably hadn't contracted whatever illness finally did him in. I think, but people say it was tuberculosis. Nobody's really sure because nobody knows. Anyway, here is his discourse from the year 1249 on what they would have reckoned was December 8th, but we would have reckoned was somewhere in mid-February, because as I mentioned yesterday, they were using the lunar calendar, and that tends to, the seasons tend to kind of drift if you use the lunar calendar, which is why it's mostly been abandoned. And so New Year's Day, or the end of the year, and the year ends in February. I think the Chinese still follow the lunar calendar for ceremonial purposes, because Chinese New Year is in February. Anyhow, here we go. Here is the discourse. Under the Bodhi tree, where the two wheels of practice and dharma are intimately turning, the flower of awakening is bright. In immeasurable, innumerable, great thousands of worlds, at this time, for himself and the entire surroundings, ease and bliss arose. My original teacher, the world-honored one, Great Master Shakyamuni Buddha, on this morning remained under the Bodhi tree, sitting zazen on the Vajra seat, accomplishing unsurpassed true awakening. When first expressing it, he said, 3/4 of this night has passed. In the remaining quarter the brightness will dawn. The various kinds of conditioned and unconditioned beings all remain unmoving. At this time, the unsurpassed venerable sage extinguishes the various afflictions, attains Bodhi, and becomes known as the one with wisdom about everything in the world. And the footnote says, the passage 3/4 of the night has passed through what I just read you, is from the Buddhakarita Samgraha Sutra, Sutra of the collection of Buddha's original practices, translated from the Sanskrit into Chinese by Jnanagupta between 587 and 591. This sutra is again quoted in the following paragraph. So this looks to be a Mahayana sutra. I mean, I can just, without even looking it up, I can tell by the style it's a Mahayana sutra. The Mahayana sutras are generally rejected by the Theravada school of Buddhism, who is the closest we have in contemporary times to the original form of Buddhism. Arguably, people can argue about that. Actually, people in the Zen stream would say that Zen is the closest we have to the original form of Buddhism, but, we'll leave that argument for later. Anyway, the point is the Mahayana sutras were composed long after the Buddha was dead, so this sounds like the Buddha's really praising himself, and the rest of the quote does too, but this wasn't actually spoken by the Buddha himself, and I doubt he talked this way about himself, so don't get hung up on that sort of thing. Sometimes people get hung up on those sort of things, but I don't think this is somebody talking about the Buddha and putting the words in his mouth. What is the meaning of the world-honored one speaking like this? This is Dogen again. He stopped quoting. Great assembly, do you want to clearly understand this? After a pause, Dogen said, in the snow is a single branch of jeweled plum blossoms. And as I said, the plums blossom in mid to late February, sometimes as late as March in Japan. And so that's the time of year he's delivering this. And I assume jeweled plum blossoms would be a reference to the ice on the plum blossoms. Wondrous fragrance strikes the nose, arriving before spring. At that time, the world-honored one also said, and this is another quote from that sutra, because of the virtue and benefit I created in ancient times, everything wished for in my heart has been accomplished, my mind of samadhi has been instantly verified, and I have reached the shore of nirvana. All my various enemies or foes, and even the demon Papias, and it says in parentheses Mara. I've never heard, well, I actually have come across that before, but I don't know why, so sorry, Buddhist scholars, I don't know why he's calling Mara Papias. But in case you don't know the story of Mara, the idea is Mara is sort of about the closest figure you can find in Buddhism to Satan. It's not quite Satan, but, you know, it's a sort of evildoer who tries to tempt him away. And the story of Buddha's enlightenment is really, really similar to Christ's temptation in the desert. If you've ever come across that story from the Bible, Jesus is going out there and meditating for 40 days, and Satan comes up and tries to tempt him with all these things and say, give up your quest and all that. This is what happened to Buddha. There is some speculation I've seen among scholars as to whether these stories might have influenced each other, because the story of Buddha's enlightenment certainly predates the story of Jesus by about 500 years. And there were Buddhist missionaries hanging out in the Middle East in those days, so it's very possible that the story of Buddha's enlightenment got sort of translated and incorporated into the Bible. I hope I didn't offend anybody saying that, but that's the story. So all my various enemies or foes, even the demon Papias Mara in the Ishvara level of the realm of desire cannot trouble me, and so they all take refuge in Buddha. And the footnote, here we go. The footnote explains Papias. Papias is another name for Mara, the spirit of temptation who opposed Shakyamuni before his awakening. Ishvara is the name of the highest of the heavenly realms in the world of desire. So Buddhist cosmology contains a lot of heavenly and hell realms. So there's not just one heaven and one hell, there's various ones. And even the heavenly realms are not considered to be permanent. So, and by the way, take this with a grain of salt if you want, but basically if you happen to have good karma and you get reborn in one of the heavenly realms in the, what do they call it here, the realm of desire, you are still subject to cause and effect, you're still subject to aging and death, although your and this is all, mythical, but take it as you will. Your karma is so good that you might live 80,000 years or 100,000 years or something like that. Some of these heavenly realms, beings are supposed to have lived, or supposed to be able to live very, very long lives. And just to be weird on you, and, again, take this with a grain of salt, because I do, even though I'm saying it, sometimes when I think about aliens, I think, well, yeah, if there were a planet that was, let's say, 1 million years more advanced scientifically than we are here on Earth, then you could imagine that there might be beings out there, in space who are living lives of 80 or 100,000 years and such like. So, maybe another way of looking at this is that you could be reincarnated on another planet which is far more advanced than ours, and so forth. And really, if you look at some of the Buddhist scriptures, there's a hummingbird over there. I'm sorry I can't turn this thing around and let you see it, but there's a hummingbird feeding. And by the way, it's raining. Anyway, so there are certain Buddhist scriptures which the folks on like the Ancient Aliens program and that will read into ideas of aliens and stuff. I take that all with a grain of salt, as I just said, but I think it's kind of, a fun speculation, but I don't really take it much further than that. Okay, let's go on with the quote. This is because of the power of my virtue and wisdom. This is Buddha speaking again, or whoever's writing as Buddha. If you can courageously make diligent efforts to seek sacred wisdom, this will be attained without difficulty. So it's always very encouraging that you too can attain enlightenment. And this also makes a kind of a difference between Zen Buddhism and other forms of Buddhism. I don't know how many forms of Buddhism have this idea that everybody can get enlightened, but not all of them do. So, for example, in Pure Land Buddhism, it's usually, and I'm not a spokesman for Pure, people keep asking me to do videos about Pure Land Buddhism, and I really don't know a whole lot about Pure Land Buddhism. But from what I do know about it, the idea of the Pure Land is that a normal human being can't be enlightened because, a human life is just too difficult and you just can't get enlightened this way. And but if you chant praise to Amida Buddha, you'll be reborn in the Western heavens where Amida Buddha lives, and maybe that's another planet, and then be able to achieve enlightenment there. And I think it's interesting that it's the Western heavens. The West is considered heavenly. So sometimes I read weird stuff into that, like maybe they're talking about the future when the West will be very developed technologically. Who knows? But anyhow, once it is attained, all afflictions will be exhausted, and all your accumulated offenses and faults will be extinguished. Another little, encouraging message there from whoever wrote this sutra. In the guise of Buddha. So Buddha is supposedly saying this. And now here's Dogen again. This is the first expounding of Dharma for the sake of human and heavenly beings at the time when the world-honored one attained awakening. His Dharma children and Dharma descendants should not fail to know this. Already having known this, how do you express it? This morning, for the sake of clouds and water monks, monks are often called clouds and water, unsui is the word, Eihei will tell it, Eihei. So this is another habit that a lot of these old-timey Zen masters have, is referring to themselves in the third person. So Eihei will tell it. Do you want to hear this? He always asks if they want to hear it. I wonder if anybody ever said, no, I don't want to hear it. Anyway, after a pause, Dogen said, when the morning star finally appeared, Buddha accomplished the way. In the snow is a single branch of plum blossoms. On the great earth, sentient beings, together with grasses and trees, attained joy as never before at this time. And the footnote about the plum blossoms says, in the snow is a single branch of plum blossoms, is a quote from a verse by Tiantong Rujing, which is Dogen's teacher, who's also known as Tendo Nyojo. I learned his name as Tendo Nyojo because that's how Japanese people pronounced it, and that's how my teacher pronounced it, Tendo Nyojo. Which Dogen also quotes in Shobo Genzo essay Baika Plum Blossoms, which I didn't look up for you, so sorry, maybe I'll do a video on that one. See verses on Plum Blossoms by Tantong Rujing in Moon in a Dewdrop, so you can go look up Moon in a Dewdrop, which is a book by Kazuaki Tanahashi, all about Dogen, and apparently that has some of his verses about plum blossoms in there. And as I said yesterday, plum blossoms are kind of a big deal in Japan. In the winter, you go out and look at plum blossoms blooming. Somewhere I've got some pictures, but they're not here, so I'm sorry I can't put them up for you, but I have some pictures of me at a plum blossom festival. I know I have them, but I don't know where they are anymore. Anyhow, so that's a thing you do. So, this is very encouraging and saying that everybody can get enlightened, and even though these words are probably not spoken by the Buddha, I think, and Dogen also seems to think, that they reflect the teachings of the Buddha, that everybody can be enlightened, and he probably didn't brag about himself and say how great he was and all that stuff, but, that was the literary style, was to put those kind of words in the mouth of the teacher and then have them say this. So, the idea that enlightenment is available to everyone is somewhat controversial among certain forms of Buddhism, but in the Zen form of Buddhism, it's not controversial at all. And what my teacher Nishijima Roshi would always say is that Zazen is enlightenment itself. So this comes from Dogen, of course, but what Nishijima Roshi would say was that there's two kinds of enlightenment. There's first enlightenment and second enlightenment. He didn't get too creative with the names there. And first enlightenment is just sitting Zazen. Sitting Zazen is enlightenment itself, and it mystically is enlightenment whether you notice it or not. And Dogen says this so many times in Shobo Genzo and his other writings that it gets boring after a while. That he says this so often. But Nishijima Roshi also said that there was something called second enlightenment, and second enlightenment would be the cumulative effect of all the other enlightenments that you've had by sitting zazen daily, and it's like something that reaches a tipping point. I think there was a book a few years ago called The Tipping Point about this phenomenon of something that, when it's accumulated enough, it just kind of becomes something else. It tips. It falls and becomes another thing entirely. And that would be second enlightenment. And that's the experience of Kensho or Satori or any of these other things. And in the Soto school of Buddhism, we don't worry too much about Kensho and Satori and all these other things. We admit that they exist. We admit it's a real thing that happens to people. There are people who can attest to it, but it's not something you drive yourself towards, like, I gotta get this. Whereas in the Rinzai sect of Buddhism, the tendency is to drive yourself towards having one of these experiences, and it's considered a bit of a failure if you don't. I probably should ask my friend Gento to talk about that, because he studied in Rinzai Zen, and I never really have, but the idea is you should have those experiences, whereas in the Soto school, it's not really a concern. So there you go. That's another thing Dogen said during Rohatsu. I don't know if there's, like I said, there's 8 of these, and I've already given you 3 of them so far. The other 5 are... I'll go take a look at them tonight and see if they warrant more talks, but they tend to be very short and very poetic and kind of difficult to understand. If you thought this one was difficult to understand, you should see some of the other ones. And here we are with the trucks are coming, the garbage trucks, so I better stop. If you want to donate to me being able to have more things to throw in the garbage, you can go to the URL you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. There you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my only ways of making a living, and I really appreciate your support. But as always, this is offered for free, so you don't gotta pay if you don't want to pay. Ziggy's inside, so I'll probably have to shoot his cameo inside. He doesn't want to come out in the rain. He doesn't like rain very much. We will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Hey, Ziggy, you don't like the rain, do you? You don't want to go out and sit with me in the rain? Alright, well, you can just stay in here by the heater. We'll see you later. Bye.